I'm Felix from the University of Leipzig, and just going to give a quick lightning talk about our ongoing work plans with the new Fedora version. I'm just to quickly say where I'm from and who I'm representing. We are one of the Clarin centers. For those that don't know, Clarin is a research infrastructure, European-wide. The way it works is there's different data centers, basically, that expose their data to different aggregators, like the Virtual Language Observatory. So yeah, people can work with those resources. It's mostly language resources in our case. And we are one of these data centers. So we use Fedora plus the OAI protocol to expose this, which also means that we don't really have a front end ourselves. We are basically just a backend repository, and we share our data outwards. Yeah, we are mostly working with corpora web services that have something to do with the corpora. Our metadata is mostly CMDI, which is the main metadata used in the Clarin environment, and also some Dublin core. And what we did mostly last year, end of last year, were some migration tests, because we are one of those community members that are still on a pretty old Fedora system or Fedora version, as is the case in some other German Clarin centers, I think. Yeah, so for us it was very interesting to try this out. And at first there were some minor problems with some external data streams, but that was very quickly fixed. Shout out to Peter Winkles for some very quick response and hotfix. Yeah, and then it basically worked great. So we could migrate everything with the migration tools. It was in the end pretty straightforward. Yeah, all resources were accounted for. One thing, however, so we need to, if we want to actually ingest new data, we will need to redo our ingestion pipeline a little bit on how we do things. And in that context, we realized that before, our hierarchies were relatively flat. We had some sets, mostly for OAI, but other than that, there was no deeper structure, so to say. But seeing like Fedora as it is, like very container driven, and there's some very good options for structuring your stuff. We actually, moving forward, want to use this this opportunity, and while redoing our ingestion pipeline, also bringing into some more structure into our how we store our data. This is of course just back-end stuff for us. Like the exposed data is dependent on metadata and collections defined there. But for us and for further development and so on, it will probably be a good thing, especially if we get more data from external projects. For example, the Mind Research repository, which was currently hosted on Open Archive's web portal and is now moved our data to us. And when we get more external project data, we want to, have a nicer structure to work with. So this is something we're working on at the moment. Yeah. So what our next steps or current steps? We of course still kind of need an OAI protocol endpoint to actually be able to expose our data. We are preparing the metadata to get everything in place, basically. We of course would be very happy to get any feedback or suggestions or guidelines that are already maybe brewing or something for a future endpoint. so we can prepare better. But yeah, this is one thing we're looking out for at the moment. And then, of course, the actual ingestion pipeline rework. And if that's done, we will probably re-ingest all of our data into a more fine-grained structure. But yeah, that was basically already my lightning talk, and open for questions. Thank you for listening.
Good. Okay, so thank you very much then for the opportunity to share this a little bit further, an update on work we've been doing about how to carry out digital archiving using Hyrax and Archivematica. So not necessarily a native talk about Fedora per se, but of course very much using one of the implementations or ways of using or working with Fedora, which is using the Samvera solution Hyrax. So I'm presenting this, but I must give due credit to those who've done the work. Laura Giles, who's our digital archivist here at the university, and working together with co-sector at the University of London, and Rory McNichol in particular. Oops. Just to give some context to this, and the reason why we ended up doing the project is that in the UK, the government awards the title of UK City of Culture every 4 years. This is a sort of parallel initiative to the European City of Culture that, of course, is ongoing. And in 2017, the UK award was given to Hull. And the idea is that although there's a particular year that everywhere it's marked and celebrated, is that the city holds that title for 4 years before handing over the baton. And like the European City of Culture, it's all very much about promoting that city, highlighting the cultural strengths and developments of that city and area. So for Hull in 2017, there were just over 2,800 events held across the city and throughout the year. When this was announced in 2013, when we realized we would be able to do it, we were very fortunate to be able to consider putting a bid in and making a proposal to create a digital archive of the City of Culture. And that project eventually saw the light of day, and that's what we've been progressing since 2017 itself. So just some images from 2017. There was a whole series of events right across the city, both outside and inside. And as you might imagine, whilst there was lots of the activities were face-to-face, lots of the activities were very interactive, they generated an awful lot of material. And these are 4 images from it. And pretty much all of that material, because of the nature in which people work these days, pretty much all of that material was created digitally. Therefore, in looking to archive this year as an event, then the only option we had was to consider the creation of a digital archive. It's not to say there aren't physical artifacts as well. There are some quite striking physical artifacts from the year as well, and we also have a collection of those. But in terms of numbers of items and types of material, they are the minority. So just to look at the records itself, various depositors, the university, artists, the culture company, which was the body that oversaw the year, as I said, almost exclusively digital, and a large number of photos and videos. And then we're also archiving the organization records of the culture company, which is 80,000 of those. And then we have box files, email files. So not a vast archive, but a substantial archive in terms of the number of files and the amount of storage space and need to process it as an archive. What we wanted to do with this was to try and create a solution that met our needs, but equally be a solution that would enable us to apply it to the archiving of other digital collections as well. So just to briefly run through the architecture of what we pulled together, we started out with a Hyrax repository. We knew we needed somewhere to hold this material. We decided to use Hyrax for that, building off the existing Hydra repository that we still have running at the university for university materials. But we also wanted to carry out preservation actions or capture preservation metadata as part of the ingest process. And therefore we explored the use of the Archivematica tool and sought to find a way of integrating this with Hyrax so that having held the items originally, the ingest process would pass the items through Archivematica and then ingest them into Hyrax for ongoing management and use. More fully, we are storing everything in Box as a starting point, and that's just because the university has that as an institutional solution. We tested or tried to use BitCurator as a way of pre-analyzing the data and create metadata files for the materials we have. And then the co-sector worked with us to develop a workflow gem or app called Hull Sync or Hull Synchronizer. And that is the app that takes the material from Box, pushes it into Archivematica. And then when Archivematica produces its output, it takes that output and it unpacks it and provides it to Hyrax to ingest there. As a side factor of what, of course, it's doing is also taking an archival copy of the output from Archivematica and storing that in an archival store. So we have ingested the material into Hyrax. The other thing we did was to ingest metadata, relevant metadata, into Calm. And for those of you not familiar with Calm, Calm is a commercial archives cataloging tool that is used quite a lot in UK archives. And so we ingested all of the metadata into Hyrax, all the content into Hyrax, and then we took a subset of the metadata to create the basis of a catalog record in Calm. And the archivists will subsequently work on the records in Calm in order to develop that catalog record for ongoing use. We then expose the records from Calm into our Blacklight catalog, and where there is full text or a full content file associated with a record, that is then pulled out of Hyrax for presentation in the Blacklight catalog, and for that we're using the Universal Viewer. There is also an add-on about using the Spotlight Online Exhibitions plugin, which is an addition to Blacklight. And we're in the process of running a small project to explore what that can provide to us at the moment. In more detail, this is how the Hull Synchronizer works in terms of coordinating the different elements. So as you see, the user uploads the files to Box. They're then transferred from Box, reviewed, and then passed to Archivematica. And then from Archivematica, they're taken, the output is taken and transferred to Hyrax and Calm. And I'll make sure these slides are shared because I know there's quite a lot of detail on them so that you can look at them afterwards if you so wish. So just to describe it as a bit more detail, so putting it into practice, what you see there is a screenshot of one of our catalog records. And the idea is that if you access a record in the catalog which has content available, then a button will appear and that allows you to display that content in the Universal Viewer within the catalog itself. Key to this was that when we originally designed the archive, we inevitably, I think, with lots of digital collections, decided that we would have a specific interface, the Hyrax interface, onto the collection. When we explored that more fully, we realized that whilst that might be nicely self-contained, it wasn't actually going to necessarily reach the widest possible audience. And hence, if we were able to display the records through the catalog interface, which already existed for other archival records, then we would be able to make sure that anyone using that established service would see the enhanced records related to the City of Culture and the content files available as part of that archive. In terms of the lessons learned in implementing this so far, and I should say that in terms of update, it's all up and running as a production system, and we are in the process of depositing the content going over the course of this year. In terms of the lessons learned, we have focused on the fact that Archivematica and Hyrax do what they do very well. We had explored, prior to this project, we had explored the idea of what it might mean to add preservation tasks to Hyrax, and to see whether or not we could embed the functionality into the Hyrax ingest process. And there was some interesting work in the Sambira community to explore how that might work. But ultimately, it ended up feeling like we were duplicating a lot of effort, and effort that was available in a different tool who specialized in carrying out those preservation tasks, such as Archivematica. Hence, we decided that it would make more sense to try and combine Hyrax and Archivematica rather than try to do too much in the same system. And therefore keeping the Hyrax and Fedora angle essentially as clean as possible and allowing it to focus on what it does well, which is to hold the content, manage the content, and structure the content. The other thing we did is that we kept it simple. So we started out again with our design with multiple content models. Because we thought, well, we're going to have videos, we're going to have images, we're going to have documents and so forth and so on. Therefore, we need a content model for all of these. But when we analyzed it, the workflow, and took the decision that we would display the content records through the existing catalog rather than through the Hyrax interface, we realized that we didn't actually need those multiple content models, because we weren't going to be using the content models to inform any type of display. The display was being dealt with elsewhere. Hence, we then simplified the model by cutting it down to a single content model, of which we labeled a digital archival object. That has served us perfectly well, given the architecture that we chose to run with. In case you're interested in this work further, just to highlight there, we produced a white paper capturing the background of the work undertaken, and a bit more detail on the technical infrastructure I described. And what we're looking to do is explore to what extent this system can be used for other archival needs at the university, but also to what extent the university can help support digital archiving by other local organizations which may not have access to that type of functionality. In terms of our next steps, as we're continuing the implementation and development, for example, using Spotlight, enhancing what we currently do in terms of the display of the materials, and we're leading towards the next City of Culture, which is this year. It's actually been delayed because of COVID, inevitably, which is taking place in Coventry. But we hope to be able to make available at least some of the whole City of Culture digital archive as part of, to mark what happened 4 years ago as Coventry get up and running. We're going to apply the solution to other university digital archiving needs, not least the university's own archive, which of course is pretty much entirely digital these days. And as I said, we'll see whether other organizations might have an interest in it. And develop further use cases for Hyrax. So for example, recognizing we only have one content model, we are looking to try and stretch it by creating a separate image content model, so we can manage other image collections that don't require necessarily the same preservation processing. And we're looking to use Spotlight to explore what it means to create online exhibitions. Okay, I'll stop there, but I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.